This lesson video is the second in a series on solving quadratic equations by factoring. In the previous lesson video, we talked about how to ensure the quadratic is set equal to 0 and properly identify a, b, and c. In this lesson, I'm going to demonstrate how to set up an x problem so that we can factor a quadratic. The learning target states I can set up an x problem to factor a quadratic. The x problem is simply a tool we'll use to help us factor. The language target says, I know I can do this when, given a quadratic expression or equation, I identify a, b, and c, which may or may not include moving terms from one side to the other as we did in the previous lesson video, draw a large x, multiply a and c and write the result in the top of the x problem, and then write b in the bottom of the x problem. Some people will also refer to these as a diamond problem. In order to set up the x problem, after identifying a, b, and c, we're going to multiply a and c and write it in the top of the x problem, and then we're going to write b in the bottom of the x problem. There is a visual representation of what it will look like with each of those letters being replaced as numbers. A way to remember this is a times c in the top, b in the bottom, or ac top, b bottom. For those who are fans of classic rock, you may have heard of the band ZZ Top, so I always think of this as similar sounding to ZZ Top. It's just a C top instead of ZZ Top, but AC top, B bottom. And the alliteration there with B in the bottom, B bottom, helps me remember that B goes in the bottom. The directions here tell us to set up an x problem for each quadratic. You'll note that many of these problems already have all of the terms on the same side. There's no equal sign, so it's easy to say that these are all equal to 0 without having to move things from one side to the other. If I look at this first problem on the upper left with the x's in it, I've identified that a is 2, b is 3, and c is 5. Therefore, I need to draw the large x, which I've already done, multiply 2 and 5 because that's what a and c are. So please make sure you also write 2 multiplied by 5 and then the result underneath, which is 10. I want to write the result a little bit larger because next lesson video, this is the number that's going to matter. But I'm leaving this 2 multiplied by 5 to remind myself how I got 10. Then I need to identify b, which is 3, and write b in the bottom. And that's how you set up an x problem. Let's take a look at this expression with the m's. Notice I've already identified a, b, and c. When I multiply a by c, it's 4 by negative 4, which is negative 16. B is 1, so I write b in the bottom. Let's look at the one with the n in it. A is 1, b is 2, and c is 10. Therefore, I'm going to multiply a by c, or 1 by 10, to get 10 in the top of the x problem. And then I'm going to write b, or 2, in the bottom. Let's look at this expression with the w. I notice that a is negative 1, b is positive 3, and c is negative 8. Once again, we're going to multiply ac top. A by c goes in the top, which is negative 1 by negative 8, which is a positive 8. And b, b, which is 3, goes in the bottom. Let's take a look at a couple more here. I've noticed with this one with p that a is negative 3, b is negative 1, and c is 4. Once again, I want you to practice writing this nice and small on the top to remind yourself that you will multiply a by c in order to get what goes on the top of the x problem, which is negative 12, and then b is written in the bottom. Let's take a look at the one with t in it. I'm noticing that t is positive 1, b is negative 2, and c is positive 24. Once again, get practice with writing nice and small that a multiplied by c in the top. 1 by 24 is positive 24, and then b is in the bottom, negative 2. Let's take a look at a problem right here where we have a little bit of work to do before we set up the x problem. Remember that the trinomial or the quadratic must be equal to 0 and or all the terms must be on the same side, and in this case they're not. I'm going to recommend that we move all 3 terms from that side onto that side by addition or subtraction. We're going to add that first power of 2 term because it is negative, and I'm going to write it here underneath the 3x to the power of 2 so that my like terms are lined up. Next, I see a positive 2x, which I know I need to subtract to move it to the other side. When I write it on the other side of the equal sign, I'm going to line it up with its like term, the negative 2x. And then lastly, I see a positive 3, which I know I also need to subtract, and that's how I'm going to make sure it's lined up with its like term on the other side. Now let's simplify from left to right, since my expression is already written with powers in descending order. 3x to the power of 2, add 1x to the power of 2 is 4x to the power of 2. Remember that the variable and its power do not change when we add and subtract. Negative 2x take away 2x is negative 4x. And then positive 1 take away 3 is going to be negative 2. Now that we've gotten this, I guess I better simplify the rest of the problem here. Need to drop down the equal sign, and I'm noting that that is 0, 0, and 0, so what remains on the right-hand side is simply the number 0. Now we can identify A, B, and C using the steps from the previous lesson video, 4, negative 4, and negative 2. Next, we know that we need to multiply A by C in order to get the top of the x problem, so we're going to multiply 4 by negative 2 in order to get negative 8. And then we know that B, or negative 4, goes in the bottom. And that is how you set up an x problem so that you can factor a quadratic.